Here's a question for you. You just finished a 90-minute hard long run. Your legs are toast, you're depleted, and you need to refuel. So, what's better for you? A few slices of pepperoni pizza or a recovery shake with 40 grams of carbs and 25 grams of whey protein? Most people would say the recovery shake without hesitation. It's clean, it's purposeful, and it's scientifically designed for athletes. But our hearts sometimes say otherwise, and we go pizza. And metabolically, the pizza is actually great. The crust gives you 50 to 60 grams of fast digesting carbs for glycogen replenishment. The cheese and pepperoni provide 20 to 25 grams of complete proteins to trigger muscle protein synthesis. So you're hitting both recovery needs, your carbs and your protein, in one satisfying meal. And let's be honest, pizza tastes a heck of a lot better than the shake. So there's a reason that athletes go for it. From a pure metabolic lens, if you're not training again for a while, especially, pizza definitely does the job. You're getting your carbs, your protein, your sodium for electrolyte replacement. It just works. But here's where the cellular health and longevity lens changes things. That pizza is an AGE bomb. The crust is baked at 500 degrees. Maillard reactions create these advanced glycation end products with every little bit of browning. And the pepperoni is processed meat, which means nitrosamines that are carcinogenic. You're also getting a bunch of saturated fat and oxidized compounds as well. You know what you're getting in the whey protein powder and maltodextrin mixed with water. There's no high heat cooking, no processed meats, no oxidative compounds. So if you're racing tomorrow and you need super fast glycogen resynthesis in that 0 to 2 hour window when insulin sensitivity is high, the shake is faster and cleaner. But if you're a recreational athlete and a rest day tomorrow, the pizza works metabolically. It just falls a little bit short on the longevity lens. You're getting a recovery, but you're also getting a significant oxidative load that can accumulate over a long period of time. In a nutshell, this is the fundamental problem with nutritional advice today. Context is everything, and yet we're still stuck in binary thinking. Good food, bad food. Clean eating versus junk. Healthy versus unhealthy. But the reality, as that little example illustrates, is far more nuanced than that. Context is actually everything. Your specific goals matter, your timing matters, your metabolic state matters. Welcome back to the FunSpan Podcast. I'm Jack Mislinski, and today I'm giving you a framework to decode any food for any goal at any time. This isn't just another diet. It's not a list of foods to eat or to avoid. It's not good foods, bad foods. This is a lens and a decision framework and a thought process through which you can evaluate every nutritional decision that you make, whether you're an endurance athlete chasing performance, someone focused on long-term health, or like most of us, especially here at FunSpan, trying to balance both. So let's dive in. Core concept in the FunSpan nutritional theory is that every single food you eat can be evaluated through two distinct lenses. The first lens is metabolic effects. This is about how that food interacts with your body's energy systems. How does it affect your blood glucose? What's the insulin response? Does it provide quick energy or sustained energy? Where do those calories go, and are they being stored as fat, used for immediate fuel, or shuttled into muscle glycogen? Now, while this lens is especially relevant for performance, your next workout, your next race, adaptation over time, these metabolic effects have profound long-term consequences as well. Chronic insulin dysregulation, poor glucose control, disrupted energy partitioning, these all contribute to metabolic diseases that unfold over decades. Or they contribute to metabolic health, depending on your decisions. The second lens is inflammatory and oxidative effects. This is about how foods impact your immune system, which is a separate pathway, your cellular stress response over time, and tissue damage. Does this food promote or reduce systemic inflammation? What about oxidative stress at the cellular level? Are there compounds being formed that damage DNA over time or misfold proteins? How does this impact your body's ability to repair and regenerate? Now, before we go any further, let me clarify what we mean by inflammation. We're not talking about the acute beneficial inflammatory response you get after a hard workout. That's super important. That's what we call hormesis or eustress because it's the signal that actually drives the adaptation itself. We're talking about chronic low-grade systemic inflammation, the kind that doesn't resolve, it accumulates over time, and it contributes to every major chronic disease in its own way. So both of these lenses matter for longevity. Metabolic dysfunction through insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, poor glucose control, these kill people over decades and silently and develop diseases under the hood. And so does chronic inflammation and oxidative damage. You can't separate them necessarily. A food that disrupts your metabolic machinery is harming your long-term health, just as a food that promotes chronic inflammation is. But there's a critical insight here, and that's that these two lenses don't always align. A food can be excellent metabolically, providing for stable blood sugar, great for performance, but inflammatory and harmful through the oxidative lens. Or the opposite, a food might be fantastic at reducing inflammation, but terrible for your workout and adaptation. So let me give you 3 quick examples to drive home that point. Example 1 is processed meat. Think bacon, deli turkey, salami. From a metabolic lens, these look very attractive. There's virtually no effect on your blood glucose. They're high in protein, which is satiating and supports muscle maintenance. And if you're trying to control blood sugar or maintain muscle mass, these foods look like they check the boxes great. But to flip to the inflammatory lens, the picture changes a little bit. Processed meats contain nitrosamines. These are compounds that form when nitrates used in curing react with amino acids during digestion. And these are genotoxic, meaning that they damage DNA and are potentially even carcinogenic, developing cancer over time. And the research linking processed meat consumption to colorectal cancer is pretty consistent at this point. So is bacon bad, flat out? Well, it depends. Are you optimizing for stable blood sugar right now, or are you concerned about cumulative DNA damage over the next 30 years? Both obviously matter to us, but the answer changes based on context. Second example is white rice. This is interesting because it's one of the rare foods where both lenses can align positively in the right context, and that's the key. Metabolically, white rice is excellent post-workout. It's a fast digesting carbohydrate that replenishes glycogen efficiently without causing GI distress for most people. And from an inflammatory standpoint, it's pretty benign as well. It's low in AGEs compared to baked goods. It doesn't contain compounds that promote oxidative stress. The main concern is there might be some arsenic in certain varieties and in certain origins, but that's dose dependent and can be mitigated by rinsing and cooking properly. So white rice around training, that's often a win-win. Now let's move to example 3, a grilled steak. Metabolically, fantastic. High quality protein, complete protein, although higher in saturated fat, which we'll get into in a little bit, and virtually zero impact on blood sugar. It's great for satiety, great for muscle protein synthesis. But in the oxidative lens, when you grill meat at high temperatures, 400, 500 degrees, you form AGEs and PAHs. These are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. That's a mouthful. Both promote oxidative stress and DNA damage. But does that mean that you should never grill a steak? Of course not. But it just does mean that you should be aware of the trade-offs. Maybe you grill once a week instead of every night. Maybe you pair it with high antioxidant foods to offset the oxidative load. Maybe you marinate it first, which research shows can reduce the AGE formation by up to 50%. So you're starting to see how this works. We can look at every food through these two lenses and start to develop a framework informed by our own personal context to give us an idea of what foods are accomplishing. We're not saying foods are good or bad here. Again, we're saying that every food has a metabolic effect and an inflammatory effect. And your job is to align your choices with your goals and your current state. So the question becomes, what are you optimizing for right now? And that's what we're going to get into for the rest of the episode. Before we get into specific macronutrients, carbs, fats, proteins, all of that, I want to give you a practical framework for how to actually use this two-lens approach in real life, because your goals obviously aren't static. They shift throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout your training block, and your nutritional strategy should shift with them. So before you eat anything, I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. Question 1, what's my time frame? Are you optimizing for the next 2 hours? Because that's more performance territory. You got a workout coming up, or you just finished one, and you need to fuel or recover effectively. Are you optimizing for the next 24 hours? Because that's then full recovery mode. You're thinking about muscle protein synthesis, glycogen replenishment, sleep quality, and managing inflammation. Or are you optimizing for the next 20 years? That's where cumulative effects matter. Chronic inflammation, oxidative damage to DNA and proteins, and metabolic dysfunction accumulating over time. There's nothing wrong with optimizing for performance or recovery in the short term, and it's not the antithesis of longevity, because in fact, the adaptations that you gain from properly fueling your training all last long after that workout. And the athlete who recovers optimally today is building a more resilient, metabolically healthy body for decades to come. So short-term optimization isn't opposed to longevity. It's often, in fact, a prerequisite for it. And that's the FunSpan lens. Question number 2 is, what's my metabolic state right now? Are you fasted? Did you just complete a hard workout? Your insulin sensitivity is going to be completely different in those 2 states. So let me explain glycogen for a moment. This is stored carbohydrate in your muscle and liver, your body's primary fuel source for moderate to high intensity exercise or super long duration exercise. You can essentially think about it as a long chain of glucose linked together that is ready to break apart and fuel whatever your energetic demands are. When you deplete glycogen through training, your muscles become incredibly receptive to absorbing glucose. So after a hard session, your muscles are like sponges. There are these things called GLUT4 transporters that are like little straws that migrate to the cell surface when insulin sensitivity peaks, and you can handle carbohydrates that would normally spike your blood sugar dramatically at other times because it's being pulled directly into the cell. So are you sedentary? Are you glycogen full? These states completely change how your body processes nutrients, which we'll explore more deeply. But question 3 is, what's my goal hierarchy? If you're racing in 3 hours, managing chronic inflammation can take a little bit of a backseat. You're going to eat for immediate performance, period. If you're dealing with chronic joint inflammation or elevated cardiovascular markers, performance might take a backseat to the oxidative load aspect of things. But most of us, again, are trying to perform well and maintain cellular health, and that requires strategic thinking. So let me walk you through a real example to show how this framework shifts throughout a single day. Let's say you're in a training block. You've got a long run planned for this morning. So here's how the framework can guide your nutrition. 2 hours before your workout, the metabolic lens is your priority. You want easily digestible carbohydrates, minimal fiber, minimal fat, because you don't want anything sitting in your stomach causing GI problems. So banana with little honey, perfect. A kale smoothie with chia seeds, probably not the best choice. That fiber is going to cause some GI issues throughout your run and affect your performance. Now, the oxidative lens still matters, but you can satisfy both by having that kale smoothie at a different time in the day. Nothing about optimizing for performance means ignoring your long-term health. It just means timing your foods strategically. During your workout, let's say it's 90 minutes or longer, just for the sake of things, you need simple sugars, sports drinks, gels. This is the stuff you're aware of. So maybe some rice balls if you're going ultra long distance. But again, this is where context matters enormously. During moderate intensity endurance exercise, you're in a very unique metabolic state. Your muscles are actively pulling glucose, again, from your bloodstream through those GLUT4 transporters, and inflammatory signaling is actually part of the adaptive response. Cytokines like interleukin-6 are released, which sounds inflammatory because it is. It's part of the immune system. but it actually mobilizes energy substrates and signals for beneficial adaptations. And again, that goes back to the eustress versus distress. Is the inflammation that I'm producing signaling for beneficial and adaptive effects or negative long-term damaging effects? Having those gels during a long run is very different from sitting on your couch and spiking your blood sugar, obviously. During exercise, that glucose is being used. In other words, it's in flux. The inflammation is hormetic. It's the stress that makes you stronger. In longer events, yes, oxidative stress definitely accumulates in large amounts, but that's also part of the stimulus for mitochondrial biogenesis and antioxidant upregulation. The key distinction here, this is acute purposeful stress that resolves, not chronic systemic inflammation that accumulates and worsens over time. And here's something fascinating about individual variation. Your personal ability to process carbs during exercise depends on your gut training, your carbohydrate oxidation rates, and even your microbiome composition. Some athletes can handle 90 grams of carbs per hour. Others hit GI distress at just 50. And this is super personal, but again, it's trainable and something that you can work up to. Now, shifting to post-workout within that 30 to 60 minute window after, both lenses start to matter, of course, but metabolic still takes the priority because you want high glycemic carbohydrates to replenish your glycogen stores quickly, and you want protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and repair. Your insulin sensitivity is peaking right now. Your antioxidant defense systems through glutathione and a few other enzymes are ramped up from the exercise stress. So your body is primed to handle nutrients efficiently and deal with the oxidative challenges. Now we get to the evening meal, say 8 hours post your workout. Both lenses are equally weighted with perhaps a slight shift towards oxidative considerations, giving the structure of your day and your workout. Your insulin sensitivity, now that your glycogen is replenished, is back to baseline. And this is when you emphasize fiber, polyphenols, omega-3 fatty acids, and low oxidation and low AGE cooking methods. Think wild-caught salmon, roasted vegetables, berries. You're supporting recovery and building long-term cellular health simultaneously. So you see how the same person can eat completely differently throughout the day based on context. That's the importance and power of this framework. So let me recap those 3 questions just briefly one more time, because I kind of went off the rails there, but they're the foundation of everything. Question 1, what's my time frame? Next 2 hours, next 24 hours, or next 20 years? Sometimes it's multiple, sometimes it's all 3, sometimes it's just performance or just longevity focused. That's something that you have to decide with your context. Question 2, what's my metabolic state? Am I fasted? Is it post-workout? Am I sedentary right now? Am I glycogen depleted or fully topped up? Those answers will inform your response to carbohydrate intake. And question 3, what's my goal hierarchy? Am I focused on performance right now, recovery, or cellular health over the long term? All right, now let's get into the specifics and let's talk more about nutrients specifically and how each of them look through both of those lenses. Let's start with carbohydrates because it's popular right now in endurance training and it's the most context-dependent macronutrient. The same carbohydrate source can be your greatest asset or a metabolic liability depending on when and how you use it. From the metabolic lens, carbohydrates are all about timing and how they interact with your glycogen stores and your insulin signaling. Post-workout, you want high glycemic index carbs. Think white rice, potatoes, bananas, fruit. These break down quickly into glucose, trigger insulin release, and drive nutrients into your muscles when they are most receptive. And this is exactly what you want. You're refilling depleted glycogen stores. But take that same white rice and eat it at night while you're sitting on the couch, glycogen already full, and now you're getting an insulin spike without the cellular machinery that's primed to handle and receive it. Over time, if you're consistently spiking insulin in a sedentary state with full glycogen stores, several damaging things start to happen. Number 1, your cells become less sensitive to insulin's signal. You get more hepatic de novo lipogenesis, the liver converts excess glucose into fat, and you accumulate visceral adiposity, which is metabolically active and inflammatory itself. This is the cascade that starts to build on itself and can potentially lead to the development of things like prediabetes and other chronic metabolically rooted diseases. And here's where it gets really interesting. There is emerging research from Dr. Rick Johnson here in Colorado at CU Anschutz and his colleagues, and they focused on an enzyme called aldose reductase. This isn't yet mainstream consensus, but it's a very compelling explanation for why context matters so much. The hypothesis is that when you're sedentary with full glycogen stores, aldose reductase can be activated, converting glucose into fructose inside your cells. Why does that matter? Because fructose metabolism is fundamentally different from glucose metabolism. Fructose, number one, bypasses the rate-limiting step of glycolysis. It gets metabolized primarily in the liver through the hepatic portal vein. It reduces intracellular ATP, which triggers uric acid production and oxidative stress. Over time, this can lead to increases in high blood pressure and eventually damage to individual organs like ischemia in the kidney or liver itself. Fructose is preferentially converted to fat, again, in a sedentary state especially, rather than being used for energy or stored as glycogen. And this pathway may help to explain why chronic excess carbohydrate intake, especially in sedentary populations, drives insulin resistance and liver fat accumulation. But here's the flip side. During exercise, this completely changes, of course, because your context is different. When you're glycogen depleted and actively training, fructose can actually be intensely useful. It uses different transporters in the gut, GLUT5 instead of GLUT2, so you can absorb more total carbohydrate per hour by combining glucose and fructose. And this is partially relevant for athletes trying to consume 90 plus grams of carbs per hour. It used to be thought that the limit was even lower than that, but that was with purely glucose. Fructose also spares muscle glycogen by being preferentially used to refill liver glycogen. And in that exercise context, it enhances glucose absorption and oxidation, and thereby performance. This is why the same refined carbs that can drive metabolic disease in sedentary populations are very well tolerated and even beneficial for athletes training 10, 15, 20 plus hours a week or doing ultra long endurance events. The key point is that your intake needs to match your expenditure. Now, let's add the mitochondrial piece because this is crucial. Using carbohydrates during endurance exercise enhances your metabolic machinery in ways that sitting at rest consuming carbs cannot. When you exercise at moderate to high intensity using glycolytic pathways, you create metabolic stress. Glycogen depletion triggers something called AMPK, that's AMP kinase, a master regulator of metabolism, and AMPK activation leads to PGC1 alpha upregulation, which is the master switch of mitochondria. And the resulting mitochondrial biogenesis increases both the quality and quantity of your mitochondria in your cells. You also increase the expression of glucose transporters, improve insulin sensitivity, and enhance fat oxidation enzymes as well. So the same carbohydrate dose, let's say it's 50 grams, has completely different effects depending on the context. In a state of cellular flux during exercise, it fuels adaptation and builds your metabolic capacity. In a sedentary state, it can activate pathways that lead to fat storage, insulin resistance, and chronic disease. This is why popular narratives of carbs are bad or carbs are good are both incomplete. Personal context, specifically your energy expenditure and glycogen status, determines the outcome. From the inflammatory and oxidative lens, the picture depends heavily on the carbohydrate source and the preparation. Whole food carbohydrates, vegetables, whole grains, fruits, legumes, these come packaged with fiber, which feeds your gut microbiome and produces these short chain fatty acids like butyrate that have anti-inflammatory effects. They contain phytonutrients and polyphenols that directly reduce oxidative stress. Refined carbohydrates are more neutral from an oxidative standpoint if they're prepared simply. Steamed white rice, boiled potatoes. But when you bake carbohydrate-rich foods at high temperatures, think cookies, pastries, bread crust, trust me, I love them as much as the next, but you are forming advanced glycation end products. I want to stop right here and be clear that I eat a pastry at least every week during my long run or around exercise. I'm not saying that you should stop consumption entirely of foods that are partially harmful in one of these two lenses. What I am saying is that you should be aware of the context and apply it to your own personal circumstance to fulfill your needs and do your own calculation of the trade-offs between what's perfectly healthy and what's worth it. That's what FunSpan calculations are all about. But yes, that crispy golden brown exterior on a croissant is a sign of the Maillard reaction, which is forming these advanced glycation end products, and we'll dive deeper into AGEs on next week's episode. So here's my framework for carbohydrates. Earn your carbs through movement. The more you train, the more your body becomes efficient at processing carbs. You're building the cellular machinery, more mitochondria, more glucose transporters, better insulin sensitivity, and all of this, paradoxically, is making you healthier than if you didn't work out and didn't consume carbs. Let me say that again. Fueling your endurance training properly and enhancing your cellular machinery will make you perform better and healthier, both short term and long term, than you would otherwise be if you weren't working out or eating carbs. But match your glycemic index to your context. High GI around workouts when you're depleted, low GI at other times when you're not actively training. Prioritize whole food sources as your baseline, but do not be dogmatic as so many diets can be, because there is absolutely a place for simple sugars and refined carbs in a performance-focused athlete's diet. And finally, be mindful of cooking methods, because steamed rice is very different than rice that's been baked into a casserole at 400 degrees for an hour. So that's all carbohydrates. Let's move on now to fats. Fats are where people get really confused, and understandably so, because the narrative has shifted so much over the last few decades, and because oxidation, how fats are damaged and modified chemically, is often overlooked. Let's break it down by fat type, looking through both lenses again and paying special attention to what happens when fats are heated and oxidized. Starting with saturated and animal fats. They're stable, which is especially important because saturated bonds don't oxidize easily, which we'll talk about more in a moment, and they support hormone production, including testosterone and other steroid hormones synthesized from cholesterol. They are literally the building blocks. But from the oxidative and cardiovascular lens, we need to talk about ApoB and atherosclerosis, because this is well supported by the evidence and highly relevant, especially to animal fats. ApoB, or apolipoprotein B, is the primary structural protein on LDL particles and other atherogenic lipoproteins. ApoB particle number is a direct measure of how many potentially harmful lipoproteins you have circulating. And this is important because studies, and even now the American Heart Association, is conceding that ApoB is the best predictor of long-term heart disease, because statistically, it is the best measurement of particles that can potentially get stuck in your endothelial wall. And once in the arterial wall, they become oxidized. Oxidation of LDL triggers an immune response where macrophages come in, they try to clear it, they become foam cells over time, and this is how you get plaque formation over decades. And it's important to note that all of us are already developing these signals in 2026. We all already have heart disease in our body. It starts in your youth. It's inevitable. And in other words, everyone will die with heart disease. It's just a matter of if you die from it. So that's why it's important. But the connection to saturated fat is this. Saturated fats, more than other fats, can reduce the expression of LDL receptors in your liver. Because you have fewer LDL receptors, your liver clears ApoB particles less quickly and less efficiently. So they stay in circulation longer, giving them statistically more opportunity, again, to penetrate arterial walls and potentially become oxidized, developing atherosclerosis. And again, context is coming back into this because athletes typically have a very different overall cardiovascular risk profile compared to sedentary populations. Athletes generally have high HDL, which of course you've heard as the good cholesterol, but that's a discussion for another day. They also have low triglycerides normally, excellent endothelial function, and lower systemic inflammation. And these factors significantly reduce the likelihood that those ApoB particles will become problematic, even if your LDL numbers are similar to someone who's sedentary. So again, no blanket statements will work here. Saturated fat is bad as a end all be all is not totally accurate, but it is something to pay attention to. Moving on now to monounsaturated fats. These are from olive oil, avocados, nuts like almonds and macadamias. And this is the rare category again where both lenses align beautifully. If I'm going to sound like a broken record, the context is right. From an oxidative and cardiovascular perspective, these fats are fantastic as long as they're not oxidized. Olive oil is one of the cornerstone foods of the so-called Mediterranean diet, which you've heard about by now, and it's consistently associated with longevity and reduced cardiovascular disease. And monounsaturated fats are anti-inflammatory. They improve lipid profiles, sometimes raising HDL and lowering ApoB, and nutritionally, it's a win-win. So if you're going to emphasize any fat category, this is the one. And this is one where Brian Johnson pounds the table and is constantly eating olive oil, which is the number one caloric contributor to his diet, and macadamia nuts. Now we move on to polyunsaturated fats, and this is where you get into omega-3s and omega-6s, and where oxidation becomes critically important. Omega-3s come from fatty fish like salmon and sardines, which you're probably aware of. They also come from flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts. And metabolically, omega-3s support mitochondrial function, which is critical for endurance performance and longevity. They improve fat oxidation and support oxygen utilization in muscle tissue because these fats are crucial for the functioning of a whole bunch of different cell types. They contribute to the cell membrane itself and are essential for effective signaling, which essentially means the communication in between cells and systems within the body. There's basically no downside to omega-3s, and most people don't get nearly enough. Omega-6s come primarily from seed oils. These are soybean oils, corn oils, sunflower oils, all of the oils that you've heard of by now in the mainstream media. Again, they're getting a terrible rap because they are ubiquitous in processed foods and restaurant cooking. And that's the main problem with them because metabolically, omega-6s are totally fine. These PUFAs and seed oils are fine in isolation when their preparation is good. But often, that second qualifying statement is the part that goes wrong in processed foods and restaurant cooking because they overheat and overuse these seed oils, which leads to oxidation. The traditional narrative focuses on omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, the idea that excess omega-6 relative to 3 promotes inflammation because they compete for the same enzymes. But I think there's something even more important that is very overlooked here, and that's, yes, that oxidation susceptibility. Because PUFAs, both omega-6 and omega-3, have multiple double bonds in their carbon chains. And those double bonds are vulnerable to oxidation, especially when exposed to heat, light, or oxygen. They are very sensitive. And when they oxidize, they form aldehydes, which are genuinely inflammatory chronically and damaging to cellular membranes and DNA. So think about this with me for a second. Consider the omega-3 versus omega-6 ratio argument, and then consider the sources where you're getting each type of fat in the modern diet. If you're getting omega-3s, they are most likely coming from fatty fish, avocados, nuts, and if you're getting omega-6s, they are most likely coming from packaged, wrapped, colorful foods or a restaurant when you're eating out. So here's my hypothesis on why there are mixed results in the epidemiological studies. It's not the sixes themselves that are problematic, it's that the primary sources are often oxidized. They're processed with heat, they're sitting in clear bottles under fluorescent lights in grocery stores, they're produced as byproducts of other products in industrial manufacturing, and they're used in restaurants for high heat cooking, reused many times. By the time you consume them, they're rancid, even if they don't smell or taste off. So the practical takeaway, it's not just about ratio or necessarily fat sources, it's about oxidation status. Some fats are way more heat stable than others, like saturated fats with no double bonds are extremely stable. Monounsaturated fats with one double bond, moderately stable, and those PUFAs, when they have multiple, are highly fragile. So this is where you have to think about what kinds of fats you're using in your cooking. Avocado oil, although partially unsaturated because of that double bond, can handle high heats. The smoke point is around 520 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's more stable. Ghee and refined coconut oil are also stable because they're those saturated fats. Extra virgin olive oil is better used at medium heat or raw. Put it on a salad that isn't cooked, and its smoke point is around 375. And yes, if you're like me and you crank the heat super high to get a nice char on a steak, that's why you'll see some smoke. The smoke itself is a sign of the oxidation. And seed oils, again, terrible rap, but if you're gonna use them cold or at low temperatures, or be sure of your sources. And better yet, get your omega-6s from whole sources like nuts and seeds, where they're protected by antioxidants, and you can be more sure of the origin. Now moving on to the really bad stuff, trans fats. Trans fats are artificially created by partially hydrogenating vegetable oils. And trans fats in popular foods got outlawed a long time ago, and that's why you see zero trans fats foods. But if you look closely, especially at the really highly popular nut butters, sorry, Skippy, Jif, people, check the nutrition labels, because you'll often see that the ingredients list still has partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. If you're getting nut butters, they should only have one ingredient: ground nuts. But they're used because the hydrogen is added in a way that twists the fatty acid into an unnatural configuration, which keeps things solid at room temperature, again, because when they're saturated, they can pack more tightly together. So with oxidized and trans fats and partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, just avoid them. Don't eat them. Don't reuse cooking oil. Don't buy seed oils that have been sitting in clear bottles. And when you cook with fats, just be aware and use heat stable options, and don't let them smoke. So my overall approach to fats is base your intake around whole food sources, fatty fish, avocados, nuts, olives, eggs, because these come with those protective compounds, antioxidants, and polyphenols. My favorite to use while I'm cooking is avocado oil because of that super high smoke point. And I no longer crank the heat all the way up to the point where it's possible that I could smoke. I leave it a little bit lower, and I can still get a little bit of a char and coloring to improve the taste without oxidizing the oil itself. Generally, I save extra virgin olive oil for low heat as a finishing oil on top of foods that I've already prepared, and get plenty of omega-3s, either through fatty fish 2 to 3 times a week, which I try to do, but mostly I just take a high quality supplement every day. And this is pretty non-negotiable given the stats. So definitely get on that. So again, to round it out, no single fat is the enemy, but quality, preparation, and context matter enormously. All right, now we're getting to protein. The popular topic, protein. Protein is essential for recovery, adaptation, immune function, and maintaining muscle mass. For athletes, requirements are usually higher than sedentary individuals, and again, timing matters. Fun fact, it actually has the highest thermic effect of any macronutrient, meaning that you burn calories just digesting it, and it's essential for muscle protein synthesis, which is critical whether you're trying to build muscle or just maintain. For endurance athletes, I try to recommend 0.7 to 1 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds, it's like 110 to 150 grams. But I try to stray closer to 1 gram per pound, especially when I'm training intensely. But why so high? Because protein does far more than just muscle protein synthesis, and this often gets overlooked in the common narrative. You need amino acids for immune function. Antibodies are proteins. Many hormones are peptides. They're used for enzyme synthesis, tissue repair beyond just muscle. Think your gut lining, skin, blood cells, all over the place. And neurotransmitter production, tryptophan for serotonin and tyrosine for dopamine. The idea that MPS caps at around 30 to 40 grams per meal is kind of true, but that doesn't mean that the additional protein is wasted. It's being used for all these other super critical functions of the body. Your body is constantly breaking down and rebuilding proteins throughout your entire system, not just in muscle. So hitting that 1 gram per pound target across the day ensures that you're supporting all of these processes. But distribution still does matter, and research suggests that 25 to 40 grams of protein per meal distributed across 3 to 4 meals optimizes your muscle protein synthesis because you're getting multiple pulses of elevated amino acids throughout the day, keeping protein breakdown minimized and building up structure. Now for the timing. Number one priority is post-workout, 0 to an hour after training, I would say. Obviously, the sooner, the better. But your muscles are primed to synthesize new protein. 25 to 40 grams, again, of high quality, complete proteins here is non negotiable. Whey protein is great at this because it's fast absorbing and it's rich in leucine, which triggers MPS most effectively. And of course, this is why recovery products and whey protein are a great product. Yeah, I drink a shake almost every day, especially when I'm working out, because it's an easy, fast digesting, effective way to get it in. And with protein, here's where timing connects to longevity separately from performance, because protein intake affects mTOR signaling. Mammalian target of rapamycin is a nutrient sensor that promotes growth and anabolism, or anabolism, depending on who you are. But you want mTOR activated post-workout. It is what starts to drive the adaptation. But chronic mTOR activation without periods of suppression may reduce cellular housekeeping processes like autophagy, which clears damaged proteins and organelles, and it only happens when mTOR is downregulated. And this is one major argument for time-restricted eating or periodic fasting, because giving your body that window where mTOR is low and autophagy is high is huge for repair and longevity. Because sometimes the damage that you're cleaning out, whether it's misfolded proteins, damaged DNA, this can nip chronic disease manifestation in the bud before it ever grows and spreads. This is especially relevant for cancer. But as an athlete, you need to balance this with performance and recovery demands. And of course, exercise itself also signals for some of these management and cleanup processes through AMPK and mTOR itself, through energy demand signaling. But anyways, the main takeaway is just that you don't necessarily want to be in autophagy during training blocks for a long period of time when you're trying to adapt and recover. But we'll get more into the fasting stuff next week. Another great time for proteins before sleep, especially casein or other slow digesting proteins before bed, can boost overnight recovery because they digest slower. Because obviously your body is in a fasted state for 8 hours, which again is good, and not eating close to bed definitely helps with sleep quality. But having amino acids on board in the first place prevents excessive muscle breakdown and can promote more effective repair. Now, let's talk about essential versus non-essential amino acids, because this is critical for evaluating where your protein is coming from. Basically, your body needs 20 amino acids to build proteins. 9 of these are essential. Your body cannot make them, so you must get them from food. The other 11 are non-essential because you can synthesize them from other compounds. Animal proteins, meat, fish, eggs, dairy, are complete proteins because they contain all 9 of the essential amino acids in ratios that are super close to what we need as humans. They're also highly bioavailable. Your body efficiently absorbs and uses them. Plant proteins are often incomplete. They're low or missing one or more essential amino acids. For example, grains are low in lysine, legumes are low in methionine, but you can easily combine plant proteins to get complete profiles. Rice and beans together provide all essential amino acids. Or you can use a plant-based protein powder that's a blend of pea and rice and hemp, formulated to be complete as well. But bioavailability is also slightly lower for plant proteins. You may need to consume 10 to 20% more total protein to absorb it well. So if you're on a primarily plant-based diet, your minimum effective dose slightly changes. And just a brief word on veganism as it relates to performance and longevity. It is absolutely possible to meet protein needs on a plant-based diet. You just need to be a little bit more deliberate, combining sources and potentially consuming more total volume. But likely the sources that you're choosing are very conducive to metabolic and immune health. And this is what Brian Johnson, the Don't Die guy, is getting at in his Don't Die Food Guide. He is close to a vegan. He doesn't call it that, but he's pretty much completely plant-based and considers that to be the most conducive to longevity. But some other considerations. Creatine is not found in plants, and to promote muscle and now emerging evidence on brain health, you'll want to consume 5 to 10 grams a day, if not more. And supplementation may become more important if you want to get B12 or iron or vitamin C, omega 3s. Again, consider a multivitamin or other sources of these supplements to make sure that you're touching all of your bases if you are a vegan. But yeah, from that inflammatory lens, plant proteins have advantages. They're lower in AGEs, they're prepared simply, they come with fiber and phytonutrients, and they don't have the heme iron concerns of red meat that can potentially be important for cardiovascular health, and we'll talk about that next episode. But as an endurance athlete, you need iron to transport oxygen to your muscles. So again, very context dependent. Then with red meat, there's the TMAO issue, trimethylamine N oxide. I think I said that right. When you eat L-carnitine, which is abundant in red meat, or choline in eggs and meat, certain gut bacteria convert it to TMA, which your liver then oxidizes to TMAO. And elevated TMAO is associated with increased cardiovascular disease risk, potentially by promoting foam cell formation and atherosclerosis. And they're still working at the mechanism and the causation itself there, but something to just be aware of. And interestingly, some studies show that omnivores produce more TMAO from a given dose of carnitine than vegans do, suggesting that the gut microbiome adapts based on your habitual diet, which kind of seems like common sense to me. So practical approach to protein, hit your numbers, 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight, distributed across meals, and prioritize that post-workout window, getting 25 to 40 grams of fast absorbing complete proteins in right away. Vary your sources, get your plant proteins in, don't burn your food, and if you're plant-based, just be deliberate about combining sources. Basically, as Michael Pollan said succinctly, and I think this applies very well to this protein section, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. All right, so we have covered a ton today. That was a little bit longer than I thought it would be, but let me just briefly recap what we've established. Every food can be evaluated through 2 lenses, the metabolic effects and the inflammatory or immune effects. Both matter for your long-term health. You cannot separate them. A food that's excellent metabolically can be harmful through the oxidative lens, and vice versa. Your job is to understand these trade-offs and align your choices with your personal goals. Before you eat, ask yourself 3 questions. What's my time frame? What's my metabolic state? And what's my goal hierarchy? Carbs are highly context dependent. Earn them through movement. The same carbs that can drive metabolic disease in sedentary people are very well tolerated and fuel adaptation in athletes, as long as your intake matches your expenditure. Fats require special attention to oxidation status. Prioritize whole food sources. Be cautious with seed oils and high heat cooking, depending on context. And saturated fats are nuanced. Just be aware of the mechanism there and use them in moderation, but also understand that they are the least susceptible to oxidation. And protein, essential. We just covered that. Don't need to be a broken record again. You understand the points. Next week, we're going to dive into the advanced strategies that take this framework to the next level. If that sounds interesting at all to you, we'll talk about fasting and time restricted eating in more detail. The benefits are real, but the application for athletes is different than what you've heard. Should you train fasted? Spoiler, probably not. We'll go deep into AGEs. These are the advanced glycation end products. We'll cover polyphenols and antioxidants. We'll talk about fiber, and then we'll put it all together with a complete FunSpan food guide for endurance athletes. The foods that pass both lenses most often, plus a full day walkthrough showing you exactly how to eat from morning to night to optimize for both performance and longevity. So that's next week. But your action item for this week, pick one meal and run it through the 2-lens framework we covered today. Ask yourself, is this aligned with my goal right now? What lens am I prioritizing? Could I adjust the food choice, the cooking method, or the timing to better serve both? That's the practice. That's how you internalize this framework and make it subconscious. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week for part 2.